Bring forward.
You are not.
I can't hear what you're saying. Did you say we're live now?
Yes.
Okay, let's go.
Hi, my name is Lino Strangers, and I've had the honour here of presenting the first in a series of interviews for Back to Business, and we hope to make this a regular part of our itinerary. Today we've got Robert Jobson. You probably know him as the Royal Commentator. He's certainly a superstar in Australia. He's known as the Royal of Royal Watches, but beyond that, he is a highly experienced journalist. He's written books. He's an author, and more importantly, he is from our perspective what we consider to be the epitome of the consummate networker as well. And he really knows how to bring people together and bring information together and distill it into something that's very powerful and important and of interest. But that's all a little bit boring. So I'd like to introduce Robert. He's on the other side of the screen. I'm speaking to him from Adelaide in Australia, and he's sitting in London. Hello, Robert.
Hi there. Good to speak to you.
Yeah. Look, I'd like to start off with a few questions, just so the audience can get a better understanding of your background. You've been doing your job as a royal commentator for quite a few years now. What was your very first job, Robert?
I think my first job was a fishmonger. I was at school, and I was working as in a supermarket. No longer exists, this one, Safeway, I think, and they needed a fishmonger. So I worked there Thursday nights, Friday nights, and all day Saturday while I was getting ready to go to university. And my father used to make sure I was hosed down when I got back from work, because I used to stink. So I used to hose myself down in the garden when I got back. But no, so that was basically, I was earning a bit of money for before going to university, and yeah, it was fun. It was good money, and I was offered the job full time, but I decided to carry on with my passion. And then when I left university, I was selling space to the magazine. It was very hard to get into sort of the training programs. Those times there was limited positions. But yeah, I got eventually was earning quite well actually at selling space on a computer magazine called ICL Today. And then I went over and got a training scheme with the newspaper in East Anglian Daily Times, which was in Ipswich, and then worked for a couple of years on local papers while still. Then I started working during the day, and then at night do night shifts in what was Fleet Street, and so that way you get known. And eventually, I think I decided to bite the bullet and just go completely freelance, and got a contract soon after on the Sun newspaper, which was interesting. It was you learn how to write quickly, you learn how to write tightly, and you learn that the importance of an exclusive story. So very, very quickly, you're all in a little mix of young reporters all trying to get the limited number of jobs that were available, and eventually got a job up in Scotland, in Glasgow, based there. So then I eventually got a job with Today newspaper, which was started by Eddie Shah, and it was the first colour newspaper. Seems extraordinary now that that was the case, but yeah, and it was very, very interesting. So I was covering general news, and then went over to eventually do Royals after I was basically asked to come in from a district to take over what was seen as the poisoned chalice in the early 90s, when the Diana and Charles marriage crisis was at its peak.
Poison chalice.
Well, usually a lot of people thought that it would you wouldn't last very long. I mean, I was quite young. I was only in my mid-20s at the time. Most of the guys doing it were, in their 40s. It was pretty much all male, apart from one Australian great lady called Judy Wade, who worked for Hello magazine, who's no longer with us, and she was a brilliant person. One of the pioneer female journalists in Fleet Street. Lovely lady, and she taught me an awful lot about the detail and being close to the detail of the story. And of course, networking, because with Hello Magazine, she had an easier ride in networking than perhaps I did. But this was an era then when people wanted to necessarily speak to the Sun. Everyone thinks it was chatbot journalism, but we used to get hundreds of calls just from anonymous people. Typically, I remember the first day of my job, I was picked up the phone and someone said there'd been drugs found on Princess Anne's plane, and I went, "What?" Checked it out, made the phone calls to the relevant authorities. And there had been, they'd all had to just get off the plane because someone had hidden some drugs in the toilet or something. So, these things happen, and that was the splash, bang, the next day. So it was quite a big, busy time, but it was a difficult time journalistically because, of course, it wasn't a good news story. It was a tough story, and you had to be on top of it. And I was working at the time for Kelvin Mackenzie, who was an infamous editor of one of Rupert Murdoch's most dynamic, I think, at the time he was, but he was quite ruthless and he wanted the stories first. He wasn't interested in coming second at any time. So, the pressure was on to break stories. And the only way to do that is to get people that, there's a great guy, Arthur Edwards, I was working with, who's still working actually in his 80s as a photographer for the Sun. And he said, if you want to know something, ask someone who knows. So essentially it's the simplest piece of advice to get. And that's what you do. You set about trying to build your contact base. But as a journalist, and particularly a tabloid journalist at that time, you make sure that you protect your sources as well. That's the most important thing a journalist can do, is to make sure that your source is protected. There's loads of ways of doing that, sometimes avoiding getting it completely right, putting in things that are slightly wrong. That way you're protecting the source because the source information isn't 100%, and making sure that the information is known by probably more than one person, 2 or 3 people. Waiting, don't rush into the publication, hold the story back. Because if you don't, then sometimes you're identifying the source that is giving the information.
Yeah, so Robert, we've plunged right into this networking issue, and this is great. But I just want to understand, you're a pretty impactful writer as well. You've written a few books. You talked about learning how to write, succinctly and to really deliver a message in your writing. Were you good at school? Were you good at? Were you good in your English classes?
Yeah, I did a degree in English and history at university, joint honours at Kent University, and yeah, I was always good with a story. I won a couple of awards for storytelling and fictional stuff. But then what I enjoyed was the writing side of it. And I had really, I saw all the President's Men with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman on the film, and I thought, this is terrific. These guys, it sounded so exciting, the whole Watergate scandal, and the way that they presented that as a story was amazing. And that sort of excited me. But of course, journalism, I don't know, I think I had my moment when I was I then left to go to the Daily Express as Royal and Diplomatic Editor. So I was able to combine the royal side with a lot of things such as defence as well. And so as diplomacy, so I'd be once a week at the Foreign Office. And then you learn a little bit more about the subtlety of networking and how it's important to build up trust. It's not all about breaking the story at that particular moment. It's about building a relationship with sources, building a relationship with government organisations as well, making sure that the embargoes are kept. All of these things become very, very important.
You've touched on a really interesting point, that building of trust, that relationship, the credibility that you need to establish. So then, you create a network of people that you can call upon. When an issue's live and active, you've got your networks, you've got people that you can call on, and you contact them, you share information, and you create a story or you develop a product. It doesn't matter whether it's in business or journalism. The question I want to ask you though is, how do you keep those networks current and alive and relevant, even when there aren't any stories breaking? As the months pass, and there's someone squirreled away in an office somewhere that you haven't spoken to for 3 months, but they ultimately could be a great source of information for you. You might
maintain that. I think it's not to leave them in the room of, for 3 months, to maintain, they're almost like a friendship. And most of my best sources have been, I broke the story that Charles was to marry Camilla before the Queen had told the Prime Minister. So most of those, got Scoop of the Year for it. So most of those sources, you've got to make sure you maintain a relationship, contact with them, not to the point where you're bothering them or you could be becoming a problem. But there are different levels of source, you know, there's, or in networking, there are different, there'll be the ones that will ring you now and again who've got it 100% right. You know, these people are deep undercover, like a deep throat as they would be. And they might come out and say something to you and say, here we got, you know, and you know, here's some information for which, you know, they will let you know. Others, you know, you have to have a working relationship with, you know, media managers, or they think press officers will never give you a story. They're there as goalkeepers, if you like, to stop you getting the story half the time. But, you know, it's having that premise in the back of your mind, that if you want to know something, you've got to ask somebody who knows. You should be afraid of going to anybody, whoever they are, and asking that question. And I think some people, when it comes to royalty or even diplomacy, you know, they can get a bit bamboozled by the people, but you've got to remember that these are just people. The ambassador is just a person. The Prince of Wales is just a person. And I've interviewed, I remember being on the Australian Prime Minister's jet coming back from Vanuatu, and I asked to speak to the Prince of Wales. It was supposed to just be a brush by. I got 25 minutes with him, just chatting about general issues. And I think you just got to remember that they're human beings too, and that, you know, they've got ideas they want to share, like anybody in this world. They want to get them out there. But also, you can't do that if it's just statements and issuing a press release or a tweet. You have to be able to have a conversation, which ultimately, communication is central to everything that we do. But I think that, I think that this development, i.e. the ability that now we can speak like this, where you see the person's face, is a great development post-pandemic. Most people weren't doing this prior to the pandemic. But telephones are quite distant. The same as, you know, sending a telegram or a letter. Letters can be personal, but the information level now is that business of sharing that communication. That is important. And I think that in a job like mine, having a profile as well now is important too, because then, you know, if someone's got a story, they will come to you. Somebody that would say, well, I like the look or the sound of that person. I like the way they say this. Then they may come to you with a story. Other people might not like you at all. That's what's happened with social media, where, I mean, I personally hate what I see sometimes when, you know, it's almost this, if you disagree with someone's opinion now, you're you know, the devil or a god. You know, there's no in between anymore. There's no, you know, you know, when you've had a good conversation where you both disagree, that can be just as rewarding as if you both agree. But they don't seem to happen very often now. And there's the level of insults over, particularly over this Meghan and Harry stuff, is really quite appalling, actually.
The Piers Morgan thing was the conflagration was pretty well covered here in Australia, and we sort of saw that sort of explode. That was interesting. So you've kind of articulated, you know, the anatomy of networking here, you know, on this issue where you have to have a short, sharp message. You need to make sure that you've got credibility with these people and build their trust and make sure there's a relationship. And you can't take them for granted, I think, is what you're saying. So does that mean there's a lot of sort of lunches with glasses of wine where you just kind of call up people?
All of that has been less now. I mean, that used to be the case many years ago. You know, when before the accountants took over the media organisations, it seems. I mean, I remember once having a serious drink with an Australian friend of mine, Jeff Crawford. God rest his soul. He was a diplomat and Arabist, and he ended up as the Queen's Deputy Private Secretary. We had a very long lunch in which we, you know, drinking various Australian wine, which a huge bill came in. But the story was, I had about 7 or 8 stories out of it. I can say it now, but, you know, I remember that going to, you know, afterwards, he was saying, well, I thought that was supposed to be on page 6, but it ended up as 6 pages, you know. So, you know, but the point of it is, yes, lunches and interpersonal interaction are very, very important. But I think the most important thing for, even I would think so in business as well, is protecting your source and building that level of trust, because information is very valuable. Information is everything, actually.
It is, and indeed, what some person might think isn't an important piece of information, to someone else it's vital. And so for them, it's just a casual observation that they provide, and for you, it can open up a whole new horizon that you didn't even think of. And so that's an important thing. You know, an issue I used to encounter a lot in my work, where we would facilitate trade and investment internationally, you'd get these well-meaning Australians landing in a foreign city somewhere, and all they wanted to do was talk business straight up, be put in front of their potential clients to show off their product or talk about their service. And we had to sort of slow them down and say, come on, talk to these people, get to know them, ask them if they've got children, see if they play tennis, whatever it might be, if they travel to Australia, or if just get to know someone a little bit first before you go straight to the jugular of talking about your business. And
I mean, that is important.
So,
but I always think that I do a lot with Australia. I also work with Good Morning America in America, and in London, do a lot here with the TV plus the Evening Standard. But I look at it and I think that everyone goes to the most laid back. Oh, the Australians are so laid back at this. Actually, when it comes to anything, they're the least. They just do it with a slightly different smile on their face. But I mean, they're always the last people when you're packing up the TV things. They're getting the last broadcast out. They're always the most determined people. They'll do it on a budget. They'll do it. And I remember once I was being with the BBC, and it was pouring rain. It was at the end of Prince Philip was retiring and walking out, and it was bucket loads of rain. So the BBC could barely broadcast, but they had like 15 people there. None of them had thought to bring their own setup. The Australian team from Channel 7, it was just two, Jimmy Cannon, the cameraman, and Hugh. We already had their tent. He had a spare tent, which he put up for them. But that's what I always say about it. I mean, they're the most determined people
look, I'm not sure,
and you can't beat them. You can't beat them, really.
I'm not sure if I should be sort of honoured, by the fact that you've, given us this credit for being so sort of motivated and determined. But sometimes it can work against you as well. Sometimes it's good to take a step back.
Just take a breath. Yeah, I think so. I mean, the thing about the royal side of things is they do it in such a good way, excellent way. I mean, in the past, years ago, we used to always have a reception where we'd invite all of the press who were there to meet, say, Princess Diana, and she'd work the room, asking about all those things. How's your family? All the things that are everything but. And then that's how the royal family side of things works. They'll go in, do a visit like that, say the Middle East or wherever, and they don't even discuss business. No business is discussed. It's all about lovely things. Then, of course, the British then follow up with a whole team of trade envoys and the Minister and the Secretary of State who go in and sign all the deals. So it's a sort of double-edged sword, really. Yeah,
it's that sort of soft diplomacy at the start, and then it sort of goes down to the business later. And I think that's true for so many different contexts. So the art of networking and keeping all of those things current is something I think. I mean, you need to be off. I think you can learn to do it. Some people are natural at it, perhaps others aren't. But undoubtedly, it's central to business.
I mean, it can be very daunting for people. I mean, I remember when I first started doing. You're going into a room of probably, the drinks are flowing and everyone's drinking. They can eat, dressed up very well. But it's quite difficult sometimes to do that. It's sometimes I found it easy, say, if I was addressing a room, and then you've been a spotlight, and then people will come to you, and then you would discuss things with them. Yeah, so it's actually like that. It's very much an art of that small talk, which the Brits tend to do quite well, and others do quite well. I think the French have always been very, very good at this sort of area, and I think, and there are others are more blunt. They will say, "Well, okay, we've had our tea. When are you going to sign the dotted line?" But I do think that in terms of contacts, you sort of have to develop friendships in a way as well, almost friendships. Put it that way. Certainly,
almost. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. There needs to be a rapport at the human level. It can't just be about the specification of your new air conditioning system.
Well, if you don't like the person, if instantly you don't like the person, when you go back home, you're not going to take the call. You can say, "Oh, look, put him on to somebody else."
Yeah, and that's often a hard message, I think, for people who've, it's easy for us to sit here and pontificate about these things, but if you're a small business person and you've just paid a massive amount of money to risk going into some new market, you paid for your airfare and you booked your hotel room, and it's a costly exercise. I suppose there is this impetus to just get down to the money talk straight away, but you
I
just
think
need to be able to.
that's a mistake in terms of not being open. I mean, one thing I've learned from this is I never did any training in television, not one bit. Now they train them at university or for journalist courses.
Yeah, that's right.
No, I did none of that, and so I literally was always open to opportunities. So therefore, I started in print media in the late 80s, 90s. And then, someone said, well, we cut, because there's no one to go on camera for the roles. They would then ask, will you go on camera? And, and you had to learn it. You're talking to TV, big networks in America, whatever. And I worked for CNN, I remember, then I did bits for NBC. And then I ended up having contracts with all these people. But I'd never actually trained formally in any form of television, none at all. Yeah. So I think the most important thing is to be open, and also open in the conversation in terms of business. Because if you're sitting down and you've got I had a meeting yesterday, which was a face-to-face meeting about a script, because I did some script stuff for this TV show called The Royals, and there was a script idea someone was coming to me with. And I was sitting down listening to what they were saying, and we completely went off on a tangent and come up with a much better idea, because you're more open. And I think if you go into a room saying, like, there's my washing machine, I want it sold by the end of the day, you're never going to be open to, putting in the fully kitchen, if you like. I mean, the point of it is you've got to, and also there's been so many situations on books and things like that where people do that.
Yeah, sorry, Robert, to interrupt, but that's an excellent point you make, is that that by establishing those relationships, you can open up a whole new set of horizons that you didn't even think of.
Absolutely. An example of that is an area for me where, obviously writing is my area, but I'd never really been involved in like the other side of it, the commercial side of it. So I met this guy. A guy rang me up and said, "Oh, look, we're doing a book on the Queen and Prince Philip's marriage." And this was a few years ago, obviously. I said, "And I need a chapter in." I said, "Yeah, I can do that. When do you want it by?" We need it, always need it the next day. So I said, well, what else have you got? And then they said, well, have you got anybody else who can do the other chapters? I said, well, I can do them. Give them to me. I'll get them to you all by the end of the week. Now, that developed into a relationship where this year I did the same with the same publishers. I did a book about the pageant, the Queen's pageant, which I'd interviewed all the clients in the back of the book as well. So all of them had their stories told, as well as the story of the Queen and her life. So that's a different concept. And as a result of that relationship, the guy that is the publisher at St James's House, a guy called Richard Freed, he now supports the London Press Club ball, which I'm chairman of, which is and gives money to the journalist charity. So we get all of the journalists every year, once a year, come to the Grosvenor House, and we work like crazy with. I get invited. It used to be like £2.50 a ticket, pounds a ticket. We all sit down like 11 men and one woman on a table, all in bow tie. Now it's lounge shoots. I've changed it completely, and it's free. You come in, and they're drinking like crazy. But it's the only time once a year the whole industry gets together. We've given one big award at the end of it for the laureate, journalist laureate. But it's a complete networking opportunity, which the industry does once a year and once a year only. Now that's where, more people have had jobs out of that one day than the amount of letters they've written trying to apply for jobs. So in keeping an industry together, like the media industry, we get TV people there as well. I think that's very important. And I've been chair of that for 10 years now with a guy called Ray Massey, my co-chair. And, as a result, I think it benefits the industry. The key there, I said, is keeping the younger people relevant too. So you've got to bring them in very early on. So we're bringing in apprenticeships and trainee people to come and network with older guys,
Well, Robert, what you've done is you've confirmed something, and I'm glad that you went there yourself without me leading you there. And that is events where people are brought together can often bear fruit as well. And, sometimes you just have to participate and see what may. You've got to get out there.
They're expensive, aren't they? It's getting the money. Finding that money every year was a pain. But eventually, because of that, what I was trying to say is because of that opportunity that opened up for me, I was able to introduce that business, that publishing house, to be sponsors to this big event. And as a result, it's no surprise in a way that they then become the official media sponsor for the pageant or for the Queen's Jubilee. So, all of these things are interconnected. And that, I think, is where the bigger picture is with with networking and events is that, yeah, they're expensive, but they can really make a difference in terms of the number one, the perception of your business, but number two, in terms of the financial growth of your business.
Yeah, that's right. Robert, we've only got a few minutes left, and can I firstly thank you for that incredible intellectual overlay you gave to what is something we all take a little bit for granted, just networking and meeting people, but you've really given a thoughtful sort of helicopter perspective, and I really appreciate that. And I think it's got relevance to people well beyond your sphere of journalism. It's a lesson for everyone, I think, in our society, whether it's business or just even your family life. So thanks for those insights. And just to keep the viewing audience happy and to get to something really interesting, and I'll just a few minutes, I'll ask you that question I asked you before we started the interview. Will Meghan and Harry be invited to Balmoral? What's your view?
Well, I mean, I think at the moment, whilst I've got this ongoing issue with security, it's going to be difficult. It'll be nice to think so, because I think Her Majesty at 96 deserves a family to be supporting her in every way possible. And I think she's a wise person. She's been around on this planet long enough to realise that families have disagreements, but they'll always be family. And I think ultimately, the way to avoid controversy and problems is to talk quietly amongst yourself rather than on Oprah Winfrey or on a TV channel.
Yeah, the Oprah Winfrey thing is a way to sort of get an audience, but doesn't mean people are going to like what they see. I think it's in Australia, I think aligning yourself with Oprah is a mixed blessing, and probably wasn't a good strategic move.
I think they were looking at trying to get their profile up and for money, but you know, it was a mistake. I think in many ways that they had a great platform within the royal family. I think if they were able just to stick it out a little bit longer, they probably, well, certainly Meghan, I think, would have probably grown to realise that if it was profile that she wanted, then she would have been given the biggest stage to perform on. So it seems a shame to me.
Robert, can I just say thank you once again for your insights. Thank you for your time. This is the first in our series of these interviews. So what a great way to break the ice with someone with your credibility and background. And this is going to be valuable to our viewing audience. So, you know, we owe you one. When you come to Australia, I'll crack open some nice red wine. I live in South Australia, and we make some good wines here as well.
I know.
So I look forward to
it.
One day. It was a real pleasure to meet you and have this exchange. Thank you very much. Take care. Thank you very much.
Okay, that was amazing. That was amazing.
Good stuff.
I think we brought that home. Thank you, Robert. Take care, mate.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Cheers.
Thank you.